Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer and take a look at the hidden architecture dictating your entire digital wallet experience. Because look, if you use a mobile payment app, you know exactly what it feels like to be moving fast and then suddenly, bam, you hit a wall. You get hit with a mandatory selfie when you're just trying to buy a coffee, or your account gets locked, or a transaction gets delayed. It feels like terrible design, right? Well, today we are going to flip that assumption completely upside down. The very next time you're cursing a cooling off period, or getting stuck in endless KYC loops, or wondering why a new feature is taking forever to roll out, remember that we need to look beneath the surface. It is incredibly easy to blame the app developers, right? To wonder why they can't just make sending money as seamless as sending a text message. But what if I told you that the friction you absolutely hate is the exact friction keeping your money safe and the entire financial system stable? I am going to show you exactly why a wallet's roadmap is dictated almost entirely by regulation and fraud prevention, not by feature innovation. The product managers building your favorite digital wallets aren't just sitting there thinking about a beautiful user interface. They are navigating this massive labyrinth of legal and technical mandates that literally force them to slow you down on purpose. All right, layer one, the Chinese wall of digital finance. Let's look at the split personality of these apps. Let's use Indonesia as a prime example here. Before this omnibus law, wallets basically operated in a gray area where your stored digital cash and your credit lines were heavily blended together into one seamless interface. But this new legislation completely rewired the ecosystem. Now, there's a strict, definitive line drawn right in the sand, officially splitting the financial architecture in two. And this slide perfectly illustrates what that means. It creates a literal Chinese wall, forcing a strict separation between your e-money and your credit lines. You've got Bank Indonesia, or BI, on one side, ensuring the macro stability of the payment system itself, so your e-money. Then on the other side, you have the OJK regulating the micro-level consumer risks, like buy now, pay later and digital banking. A tech company offering both has to build massive internal barriers just to comply with both regulators simultaneously. So here's the kicker. This regulatory bifurcation requires a complete architectural split in how data and funds move on the back end. Your e-money balances under Bank Indonesia's jurisdiction absolutely cannot be automatically swept to pay off a buy now, pay later debt managed under the OJK's rules unless you go through a specific, highly auditable consent flow. That annoying extra button tap you have to make, yeah, that's not poor design. That is strict regulatory decoupling in action. Now moving on to layer two, TIKMI, and the launch gatekeeper. You might wonder why fintechs can't just launch features fast. Well, under Bank Indonesia's PBI 10/2025 regulation, providers don't just get a static license anymore. They have to run a literal gauntlet. It's a grueling 5-pillar assessment known as TIKMI. Every single aspect of their business, from their transaction volume to the security of their IT infrastructure, is constantly graded to assess their systemic footprint. And this is wild. Missing that TIKMI threshold means your product launch velocity is explicitly controlled by your regulatory competence score, not your engineering speed. If a platform scores poorly on its risk management, the central bank can flat out suspend its ability to roll out that cool new feature you've been waiting for. The entire product roadmap is essentially held hostage by compliance. Let's look at the IT pillar specifically. To pass, platforms must adopt the National Open API Standard, or SNAP. This means tossing out simple API keys and dealing with the complex asymmetric cryptography you see right here. Just to generate a B2B access token, the system requires an intense mathematical handshake using public and private keys just to say hello over the network. And the complexity doesn't stop there. Imagine this. For high-volume transactions, they use symmetric cryptography. Before even hashing the request, the backend has to strip out all non-structural whitespace in a notoriously brittle process called JSON minification. Literally, a single out-of-place space character in this payload will trigger an immediate authorization failure. If the receiving bank reads a trailing comma differently than the sending app, boom, the whole transaction fails with a 401 unauthorized error. 15 minutes. Under these SNAP protocols, access tokens carry a strict 15-minute expiration window. This is great for safety, ensuring compromised tokens have a nearly zero attack surface. But think about that from an engineering perspective. Processing thousands of transactions a second and generating new cryptographic tokens synchronously every 15 minutes creates massive latency risks. They have to build incredibly complex background systems to seamlessly rotate these credentials without you ever feeling a delay. Which brings us to layer 3, when friction stops fraud. Let's see how these backend rules hit your phone screen. For example, let's look at Malaysia's RMIT policy. It enforces one device per user binding. Now, while this stops account takeover fraud and SIM swaps dead in their tracks, it also completely halts your access to emergency funds if you lose your phone abroad. Try logging into your digital wallet from a friend's phone to grab some cash, and the system immediately hits you with a mandatory cooling off period. The exact friction protecting you from a hacker is simultaneously blocking you from your own money. Over in the Philippines, the central bank is actively phasing out standard text message OTPs. Why? Because on-device malware easily bypasses traditional backend security checks. A hacker doesn't need to breach the bank's mainframe if they can just read the OTP text right off your infected phone. So, regulators are pushing for smart friction right at your fingertips. They're using things like behavioral biometrics that track exactly how you type, or FIDO passkeys, to stop automated malware before it even starts. But there is a serious cost to all this smart friction. While it's mathematically superior to interceptable text messages, these checkpoints frequently time out on legacy devices or bad networks. If you're traveling on a spotty local 3G connection, that advanced biometric scan might just spin endlessly, locking you out when you need it most. So this advanced security adds major UX friction because it's inherently tied to your hardware and your connectivity. Let's jump into Layer 4, funneling you through KYC. Because regulators don't just use friction for security. They also use it to manage massive macroeconomic limits. Look at the extreme regulatory dissonance across the region. A unified, frictionless Pan-Asian wallet is mathematically impossible when balance caps vary so wildly. A user in Singapore might be legally allowed to hold $20,000, while a user in Malaysia is capped at 5,000 ringgit, and an Indonesian user is restricted to just 10 or 20 million rupiah. You literally cannot build a single, seamless regional app because the legal ceiling changes every time you cross a border. To put that into perspective, look at Indonesia's rigid two-tier system. If you want immediate, frictionless access without handing over your ID, you are hard capped at a 2 million rupiah balance, and you can only pay merchants. If you want to unlock transfers and cash withdrawals, it literally forces you through electronic KYC, uploading IDs, doing liveness checks, just to prevent money laundering. That annoying onboarding process, it's a deliberate toll booth you have to pass through to move meaningful amounts of money. All right, let's wrap this up with our final section, the front-end illusion. We've talked about the cryptography, the device binding, the strict limits. When you tap your screen and a payment clears instantly, that's just a beautifully designed mask. It's an illusion covering cryptographic handshakes, dynamic treasury hedging, and massive compliance algorithms running in milliseconds. It's not naturally fast. It's because massive, pre-funded liquidity pools are absorbing all that friction and all those regulatory checks behind the scenes just to make it feel instant to you. So I'll leave you with this thought. The next time you encounter an annoying verification prompt, a mandatory selfie, or a delayed feature, ask yourself, is that friction actually the very shield keeping my money safe? We all want seamless technology for sure, but in the complex world of digital finance, a completely frictionless experience might just be an open door for systemic risk. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, the architecture beneath your fingertips is so much more complex than it appears. Catch you next time.